So we're today here at the fifth edition of TSFE 2025, joined by Ms. Shalini Jaiswal, ma'am. We're so pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you so much, ma'am. So the first question I have for you today is: when you look at the early education space in India, what is one misconception that often goes overlooked and holds tremendous value in reality?
When we look at the early learning space, what I would say, what we really overlook is the needs of the learner. Like what the child has to learn. We normally focus on the cognitive side, but it's very important to look at the other side of learning, where the emotional development or the physical development, or even how the foundation is for these core subject areas. We immediately jump into the core concepts, but the important thing is giving them a foundation, and how having play as a medium of learning, helping them explore, or giving them a lot of time to be themselves in the school is what is being overlooked. Parents look at it as a readiness for K to 12 schools. They want them to qualify for the entrance exams, and they have pressure that will my child, qualify in the entrance exams. And this is what we want to actually bring around in a change. That these are the foundational years, and how do you help children develop a foundation rather than focusing on learning to be away from the parents, or will they qualify for the interview or things.
Right. I believe a lot of this foundation building also comes from the curriculum and the environment that the student is in. So you've also been part of building and developing these programs, whether it be through Methodel or through Exceed. So what would you say is a good starting point for any curriculum that is a non-negotiable?
The starting point for the curriculum, which is non-negotiable, is as such we need to know what kind of school I want to be. There are, I'm not saying there's only one way of teaching learning, but what pedagogy I want to follow. And non-negotiable is you need to have the scope and sequence for the entire 4 years. Normally when we build a curriculum, we pick up topics and we say, okay, I'm going to teach this, and toddler I would teach the activities, and then nursery, JK or SK. But if I have my scope and sequence which defines the learning outcomes for all areas of development in a natural way, so the progression is very clear. Based on the learning outcomes, then I design my activities. None of the areas can be left. I would say all areas are non-negotiable. So it's a holistic development. But when I'm designing my curriculum, the most important aspect is, before you even start planning your activities or the themes or units, do you have the scope and sequence for the year? How your child will grow or learn throughout the year? The learning outcomes have to be in spiral. They grow on each other rather than randomly picking up. And that will help you build a robust program, whichever pedagogy you follow.
I think one of the limitations that comes with this is oftentimes teachers or parents even have already understood what they want for their child, what they want their education system to look like. How would you say this change is going to come about, and how within the maybe in the next 10 years, how would that look like?
See, parents know it's very. The change will only come when there's a strong parent and school partnership, where we really educate the parents, and as school we believe in what we do. Lot of time, preschool especially I'm talking about, because it's a very short term. The child is there, and they want admissions, so they listen to the parents. If the parent says I want this to the child, it's a yes for everything. The first thing is we should stop doing that, and we should help the parents understand what your child needs and why are we doing it. Lot of time we do not talk about the whys, and the parents see, okay, this is how I have studied, this is how my neighbors kids are studying, so I want my child to study in that. Irony is we do not look at what the child needs at this stage, and what is the latest in terms of research which should come in the school or the teaching learning environment. I compare it to like a doctor. When we go for any treatment, we look at the latest research and we ask the doctor, do you have this treatment in your hospital? But when it comes to education, we say, no. How many books, or do you teach the way I learn? Things are changing, the world is changing, and that's where, as educators, we have to stand strong, even if it means letting go of some parents, so that you get the like-minded parents. And if all the preschools start believing in that what even the NEP or the NCF says, and starts explaining to the parents this change is going to come. Right now, most of them would bend rules for the children. Oh, we are doing it because parents want it. We are doing these books because parents want it. I have to do cursive writing in nursery because my parents want cursive writing. But do I explain why aren't we doing that and what is important? And that's where I think if we stand together as a group, we can bring in a change. In the next few years, parents will start seeing the importance of PCE as the foundational years.
So I believe parental engagement and interference is definitely very important, and it's very important that both parties, whether it be the parents and the teachers alike, come to that middle point so that they can build the curriculum accordingly.
And sharing, that's why, you know, when you have a strong connect, a lot of time you'll say we are doing it, but the parents really don't know the reason. So telling them the reason why helps the parent understand and they stand by it.
Giving that rationale gives
Rational. We've
builds
seen
confidence in the curriculum
So,
itself.
like we've seen that in our schools when we talk about Maple Bear, we don't tell the teachers say, "Oh, Maple Bear says to do it like this." No, but why? If I'm not doing it in a certain way, why aren't we doing it? So, like if I introduce language, why aren't we introducing alphabets? Why are we doing phonological awareness? Why are we just playing with sounds initially? And that why helps the children understand what, you know, the parents understand why it is important, and then they talk about it and they question others who are doing it the conventional way. Okay, you know why we are doing it, this will help my child in a certain way, and that makes a difference.
100%, ma'am. I completely agree. A little bit about holistic learning, as you had mentioned earlier. That also falls with experiential learning, creating a engaging environment in class. What does that actually look like? Because we've spoken about this, a lot of educators speak about this, but how can we actually implement it with different strategies? And what would actually work best for the students?
See, when we talk about play-based learning or experiential learning, the word means what play means. I'm, you know, playing with certain things. Experiential learning is I have materials in my hand. So the most important foundation for this is to have tangible things for the children to explore, and to have those tangible things in the you know, it could be, I'm not saying it's fancy, but it should be something which the children explore and the object is in the child's hand, and the teacher is not telling the child what to do with the materials, but just helping the children explore and figure out things for themselves and see what happens. For this you also need space. You know, I can't have benches and then say it's a play based learning. I cannot have in such a small room 20 children and I say I do play based learning, because there's no movement allowed. So it's very important when we look at various things how it is happening. And simple way I would give you an example is a lot of time we introduce primary colors and secondary colors, and we say okay, when you mix two colors it gives you yellow and blue gives you green, and then we tell the child to have one thumbprint with yellow and one thumbprint with blue, and they mix and oh, it's green. That's not experiential learning. But I've done an activity, so it's a play-based learning. But the thing is, now if I give them colors and I just leave it on the paper, one point the children are, you know, using hands or brushes or sponges, and they're, you know, they're kind of trying to make some art. And suddenly when they see, okay, I have yellow, I have blue, and I have various colors, and they find something new coming. Oh, you've got this new color. This was not present here. How did you get green? And the child really doesn't know, because the child was just playing. And next time, okay, let's see how did you get it. So next time when the child is doing it repeatedly, now the child figures out when I mix blue and yellow, it's becoming green.
Right.
And then the child says, oh, I did this, you know, I mixed blue and yellow and I got a new color. And wow, you've learned about secondary colors. So this is play-based learning, where I let children explore and figure out, but I just guide them with open-ended questions. So and then this learning is permanent.
Right.
Because I'm not saying, I shouldn't be using permanent, but it's long-term memory. And the child is able to recall it even after long, because the child explored and figured out, and that's the confidence which the child gets. I can learn on my own.
It comes in a natural way.
It comes. And this is a simple example which differentiates when schools say, and that's what parents and every one of us should look at, play-based learning, who is taking a lead. Is the teacher taking a lead? That's not play based learning. If the teacher is doing the talking, that's not play based learning. Is she, if she's questioning, if she's encouraging children to figure out things, if she's asking open-ended questions, and children are asking questions, they're talking, they're exploring, that's play based, that's experiential.
How you had mentioned that just aligning benches is not going to allow the student to actually learn in play-based learning. So do you believe that India is actually infrastructurally ready for that, or even the mindset? Because that's where it begins.
It is a long time. There is India, but even within those spaces you can make things happen. Like I have worked in schools where instead of putting them into rows, you just cluster them into groups,
Right.
and you make space in the middle. You could take children outside to do a lot of activities. So if you do not have space in the classrooms, you can take them outside. So that's important. So it's the mindset. Like with Maple Bear, we had started a program called Magnify, where we work with Anganwadis and all. And it's a multi-age group, but we were able to bring this play-based learning, and we saw the attendance increase. And the children were happy because they were using materials, recycling materials which were used at home, recycling all waste materials as play materials for them, but giving them that whole idea. So you don't have to have fancy spaces, but the thing is the mindset to do that. And to do, and that's why when I mentioned routines are important, I need to help the children understand how to use the materials, what will come. Otherwise initially they will just play with it randomly. So routines, putting the material back, following instructions, looking at things the way they have to be, all those things will lead to. So it's not a very easy task. The teachers have to be trained. They need to help the students understand how to, what they need to do, and how to manage those materials in the classroom to have those play based learning. Otherwise, when the children are not listening, the best thing is for the teacher to have the materials in her hands and give it only when she is there, so that the children do not go. So there is a long way, but I'm sure it is possible by training teachers, giving that freedom to the teachers, just kind of changing some things in the classrooms, how you look at those things, using spaces which are outside the classrooms, extending the classroom a little outside. I can do most of the learning in the playground outside. It doesn't have to be confined in the four walls of the classrooms.
Right. And just how you had mentioned, teacher training is very important because that's where it actually starts. They are in control of the entire class. And you've also been very involved with the area of teacher training, right? So, what would you say, according to your insights from what you've gathered, is often overlooked by teachers?
I would say it's not often overlooked. It's the whole thing is when you look at ECE, when you say NTT, teachers who've done NTT or who've done these courses, they are mostly trained to prepare fancy portfolios and theory. In practical, you have to help. Each teacher comes with her own struggles and strengths. So the teacher training has, the schools have to see what their teachers need,
Yeah.
and then have the training and then follow-ups and handhold the teachers. Mostly teacher training would be, I call an expert for 2 days, she does training, the topic is randomly decided by the center head or the owner. Is it meaningful for me? Is it meaningful for my school? Is what it is. So do I ask the teachers, where do you need help? What will help? What will work if I help you with this? And then go back, okay, we've done the training, let's now have the next steps. Let's set smart goals. What are my next steps? How, this is the first thing we'll bring to the classroom. Everything cannot be done. So setting smart goals for the teacher, one step at a time, is what the teacher training should look like. I'm not going to blame the teachers for it. It is the management who is responsible for bringing in the right kind of mentorship for the teachers and mentoring them in the classrooms. Because you tell me once, I say, wow, it's very nice, and I'll go back in the classroom, but I do not get the support. So my now my school, she says, no, you can't. You have to finish 4 pages of written work because parents want it. Out goes my learning, because those 4 pages, the entire day is gone, because now my children come for 3 or 4 hours. They have lunch, I take them out, do some rhymes, and then 4 page of writing. Out goes the work. So is my school helping me implement those strategies, or is it just on paper? So it's very important. It's a whole, I would say we do it together with the teachers, with the management, with the center head. Just look at what my learning goals should be, where my school is, what help my teachers need, decide on the right kind of experts, handle them, provide them with those resources. It's a 360 degree thing. It's the entire year long process.
I think what I gathered from that is you can't follow a formula of A plus B is C.
No.
You have to look at what is actually required in whatever institution you're in.
Absolutely. It has to be customized for your own school. Each human being is different. Even if, like at Mapleware, we have multiple branches, but we have to customize trainings for all our branches, depending on the teachers who are there and their needs and their struggles.
Right. While I did talk about how you can't follow a specific formula, according to your experience, has any time there been an experience where you've implemented a method and the reception has always been positive?
In terms of teacher training,
Yes.
I would say our teacher training is not being, it's like not a sage on the stage. We do all hands-on activities, and lot of things and our trainings are like what we do. So when we are in the schools, we talk about certain things, but we also go and demonstrate them in their classrooms, and that's a short formula. So if a trainer is able to do it in the actual situation, the teacher gets the confidence. If she could do it with my children, I can do it. And that's what we call as observation coaching. Whether we've done a session, like if I've done how do I do a read aloud with a book, or how do I do a circle time, but I'll say, okay, tomorrow I'll come in, I'll be in your class and I'll demonstrate circle time with your own children. And wow, my teacher gets the confidence to do it because she's seen it happen live. Because a lot of time they say, oh, it's easy, but you do not know my children, how things are. And we've seen that, ma'am, आप यहाँ के बच्चों को नहीं जानते हो. These children are very different. So, but if I am able to demonstrate it with your own children, you get the confidence to do it. So, some things, having trainers come and be in the classrooms with the teachers is a short method of helping teachers learn how to do things in school.
Thank you so much for that answer. Just one short question to end this segment of teacher training. What would you say is one underrated skills that teachers should develop?
I would say especially the connection with the child. Underrated skill would be how do I give instructions to the children. We normally don't look at it. How do I frame my, not even questions, my statements. Simple thing is when I say, okay, don't run. Instead of saying don't run, if we say we walk.
Right.
Using, using positive reinforcements and positive statements is, none of the schools actually look at it, but that's the most important thing which you should do with a young child. And kind of talking about what the child is doing correct rather than talking about what the child should not do, and praising the child when they're doing the right thing. And these are the most important things you could do, and that you see your classroom settled and in a much better. So positive reinforcements, using positive statements. You have to think again, when I say don't hit, we keep our hands to self. It takes time, but you'll see using don't, the child doesn't even know.
Yes.
Because you're saying no to it. And sometimes the child really doesn't know. If you've said no, what should I do? But if you tell the child exactly what you want them to do, they follow that. So these are the skills I feel I've seen most of the schools the teachers lack, and we have to help them develop the skill on how to speak or communicate with the children in a positive way, so that they listen and they are able to, they're settled in the classroom.
That's very insightful. I never thought about it like that, but it adds up perfectly because we're so centralized on focusing on discipline that we forget how to actually implement it.
Absolutely.
Just to end this, how we've talked about building that confidence, I think it stems from having those conversations to begin with. What do you believe about having a platform such as ESFE, where so many educators are together having these important conversations?
This is, I would say, I saw the kind of people here, and even when I see a lot of people who've done a lot of innovation, a lot of educators here, this is a beautiful platform to share your views and stand together as a community and work together. It's not you and me or your versus you versus me. It's something for the children we do collectively, and we make sure we evolve as educators, learn from each other. Even I've gone, I've learned a lot of things from talking to people. So it's learning from each other, and this is a beautiful platform. This is the first time I've attended ESFE in the, this is the fifth edition, but I'm really happy, and we should have these kind of events too.
We're so
Absolutely
thankful
amazing.
to have you here today, ma'am. And with that, we come to the end of our conversation. We're so thankful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark your calendars. October 6th, 7th and 8th. NESCO, Mumbai, the center of the educational universe. The biggest names are already there. Are you? Secure your spot. Register now at 9892227245 or visit our website.